How do we create real change to heal and advance a dysfunctional society? And does a vigilante punching bad guys in the face actually do anything? Well, what's up, guys? Jared here, and we're going to be talking about this and more in this review and analysis of Matt Reeves' The Batman. Now, for the first part of this review, there are going to be no spoilers, so for those of you who haven't seen the movie yet and just want to know my general thoughts, those will be included. And then after that, we'll be analyzing the film's themes and philosophical developments when compared to other Batman films. But first, really quick, I want to tell you guys about my new Twitch stream. You should follow me on Twitch. The link is in the description. My name is Calsary87. Calsary Canet means getting drunk in your underwear with no aspirations of leaving the house in Finnish. I currently live in Finland. I'm playing Elden Ring right now. I'm going to be streaming on March 5th and March 6th at 9 a.m. PST, so you should follow me there. You can ask me anything. We could talk about Batman. Let's get to it. Well, everybody, I got good news, and the news is the tone works. That's the most important thing about this movie, and the thing I was most concerned about is the even grittier, even more violent, even more realistic aesthetic going to work, and the answer is yes. It works tonally. Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson pull it off. Be sure to see it in a theater. It's totally worth it. Pattinson, or Bat-Pat, or whatever you want to call Robert Pattinson's version of Batman, is good. He pulls it off. For those of you who have been following him since he started working with David Cronenberg, you probably guessed that he's the real deal, and he is. And he's probably the best Batman, certainly since Christian Bale. Not that Ben Affleck was necessarily awful. The only really awful Batman we've ever had are George Clooney, and Val Kilmer was all right. But it's not just Robert Pattinson that really makes this movie shine. It is an excellent ensemble cast. Everybody is bringing their A game. John Turturro as Carmine Falcone is really good. But not only that, just all the cops, all the citizens of Gotham, more so than in any other Batman movie, you really get the feeling that these Gothamites are city people, from the very specific accents that they have to the way they carry themselves. These are real city people. It gives Gotham a very lived-in feeling that when compared to other Batman movies, you don't really get as much of a sense of. Now, this movie is a mix of Saw, Zodiac, Seven, and Watchmen with a little twist of Kurt Cobain thrown in there, and it's not subtle. It wears these influences on its sleeve. I mean, there are whole shots, whole scenes, whole production design choices that are lifted directly from David Fincher films, and it really is those Fincher films that are most obviously a source of inspiration here. You could say that inasmuch as Joaquin Phoenix's Joker is a remix of Scorsese's King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, you could say The Batman is a remix of Seven and Zodiac, and depending on if you guys like this video, I could probably do a whole video just on those influences. Another thing about the movie that's worth mentioning, and this is not a spoiler, I promise, it has one of the best car chases in recent memory. And it's great not because it has the most cars or the most explosions like The Matrix Reloaded, and it's not great because it has the most crazy spectacle that the Fast and the Furious movies have going on. It's actually a very simple element and a very smart element if done right. It's just rain. The rain makes it one of the most tense and kind of nail-biting car chases that I've seen in many years. It really feels more like Steve McQueen in Bullet than it does any recent kind of CGI era car chase movies. So some really smart action filmmaking going on here. Obviously, I want to talk about the runtime. The 3 hours goes by for the most part pretty quickly. I mean, this is a movie that aspires to be a psychological thriller, and as such, it really keeps your mind hooked for those 3 hours, just like, you know, if you were a, as they call in the movie, a drophead. As the rest of the reviewers have been saying, this is a more gritty and realistic version of Batman. This Batman is fallible, he's vulnerable, and he's more of a detective than he is a ninja. He's not super high-tech like Nolan's Batman. He's more a guy with a lot of body armor and conceivably experimental military-grade equipment. And this elevated sense of realism also extends to how the film deals with themes that are familiar to the Batman films. So now we're going to be transitioning into spoiler territory, so this is a warning. Pause the review now and hit me up later if you haven't seen the movie. But if you haven't seen the movie, you should be making plans right now, because guys, it's a good time. All right, so the film's emphasis on realism in this movie also extends to the efficacy of Batman's efforts. For the first time on the silver screen, we have a Batman who asks himself, Am I even making a difference? Can a vigilante make a difference in healing a broken city? So, in order to answer that, let's talk about Batman's arc. What does he learn by the end of the movie? So, if you followed me during my previous venture, at one point we made a video tracing the symbolic development of villain motivations, and one of the things we talked about was how recent villains like Killmonger in Black Panther, or Thanos in Avengers, or John Lark in Mission Impossible 6 are reacting and fighting against a corrupt, unsustainable, perhaps even irredeemable system, but their solutions are just way too radical. And so, even though the status quo is rotten or unsustainable, the good guy has to protect it from a more twisted alternative. The Batman similarly shows us a depraved vision of Gotham, in which almost every official is corrupt. And as it's stated numerous times in the film, it's the system that is rotten to the core, as even the seemingly benevolent Gotham Renewal Program is a front for a drug operation that continues to produce poverty, desperation, and obscene levels of inequality. So we have a status quo that, similar to the Nolan franchise, is corrupt, and Batman is trying to change that. But the answer as to how and how the villain informs this answer is quite distinct from Nolan's films in a really interesting way. So we're going to have to jump to the end of the film now, when the Riddler reveals to Batman that he was communicating to him through his riddles because he assumed they were on the same team, because they both want to punish corruption, and so the Riddler used Batman's formidable physical strength to help him execute his master plan. At the beginning of the film, when a thug asks Batman who he is, Batman answers, "I'm vengeance." And we see that in the trailer. It's something that's very important not only to the overall tone and aesthetic of the movie, but also thematically. Because at the end of the film, when one of the Riddler's social media followers slash subscribers slash Patreon patrons is asked the same thing after a cop takes off his mask, someone says, "Who are you?" And he also responds, "I'm vengeance." And it's here that Batman realizes that the Riddler's methods are the logical end to Batman's crusade against crime and corruption. This is, if we were to go back to David Fincher's Seven, this is essentially Batman's what's in the box moment. Okay, so if brutalizing evil individuals and spreading fear of breaking the law can't produce positive change, then what can? And this is where the movie gets quite interesting, especially if you frame it, as I have, of being in conversation with the previous Batman films that Nolan helmed, especially when you consider that those movies at the time were also revered as being more gritty, more realistic. So Nolan's trilogy ultimately concludes that evil can be expelled from society through the power of symbols, that the actions of a noble, often self-sacrificial individual can act as a symbol that inspires people to believe in and do good, and that we need these great individuals, whether they be Batman or Harvey Dent or Robin at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, to act as a force of hope that guides individuals toward virtuous decisions instead of corrupt decisions. In a sense, Nolan justifies the vigilante by affirming faith in an individual's ability to elevate themselves to an image that functions similar to, say, a religious figure like Christ. And in my recent video about Ben Shapiro's first movie, I mentioned that Nolan is very much a conservative artist, and this is partly what I'm talking about. So Reeves' Batman, in contrast, comes to a very different conclusion. And there's two scenes in particular where we see Pattinson's beliefs on justice and ultimately what can redeem a society challenged. So the first scene is when Batman tells Catwoman that her friend Anna made the wrong choices, and that's why she ended up hanging around murderous gangsters, and that's why she ended up dead, that there were consequences for her bad decisions. And Catwoman responds by saying, "Choices? What choices? Whoever you are, you obviously grew up rich." So it's here in this moment that Batman realizes that freedom isn't a binary idea. And when I say we, I can only really speak as a citizen of the United States, but we were largely brought up to believe that basically if you're not being forced to do something by gunpoint, then you're free to do anything or to take any alternative. The notion of freedom is very binary. You're either free or you're not. But this is, of course, an oversimplification because a person's freedom is on a spectrum. A rich person has exponentially more choices than a poor refugee like Anna, because when making a bad decision enables one to survive, the freedom to choose the nobler option is largely an illusion. A person with resources has a greater chance to never be put in such a situation, and so the freedom to choose good, to choose safety, to avoid a life of crime is much less hypothetical than it is for someone like Anna. So the second scene is when the Riddler does something similar with the concept of an orphan, that it too is not a binary idea, but is on a spectrum. Because sure, both Bruce Wayne and the Riddler are technically orphans because their parents are either dead or absent, but Wayne had billions of dollars, while the Riddler grew up surrounded by poverty, death, drug abuse, and all sorts of things that undeniably stunt and pervert a child's development. And when you put the word orphan on a spectrum like that, it puts a community's institutional obligations in an interesting light. So if a parent's job is to provide a safe environment for a child's development, and in the case of Bruce Wayne, he was able to achieve such an environment for safe development with money, now at least in theory, because the Riddler doesn't know that Bruce Wayne is Batman and that he has his own scars, then it's not only the absence of parents that creates a state of orphanhood and all the developmental challenges that come with it. It's also a lack of a social safety net and the impotence of our social institutions that are meant to elevate the needy. And thus, Batman realizes that punishing people for making bad decisions does nothing to prevent them from being put into the kind of compromising situations that breed bad decisions like crime. He essentially learns that without his money, he'd be no different than the criminals he beats up, or even the Riddler. For every criminal Batman punishes, there are 50 more people in bad situations where choosing good isn't a realistic option, or at least you would have to be as pure as Christ himself in order to choose that nobler option, but that's just not realistic. The kind of people who usually level those kind of expectations at people are the people that are in these very privileged situations where they can't actually even comprehend being put into a situation that's that compromising to their moral code. So Batman realizes that in order to truly rehabilitate to society, you can't do it through fear. You must do it through systemic rehabilitation. And this is why there's that one thug at the beginning of the movie who looks very reluctant to terrorize the other citizens, like they're playing Knockout or something, and there's this one thug who's got like half the face paint on, and the camera's always lingering on him in a close-up, like he doesn't actually want to be doing this, but he's doing it anyway because I guess we can assume he doesn't have any other choice. He's another Bruce Wayne without money. And thus, the movie ends with Batman framing himself as a force for the collective. He's assisting citizens out of the rubble and committing himself to be more oriented towards helping the people. And I think this is communicated in a particularly beautiful aerial top-down shot in which Batman holds a flare and he leads a crowd out of the flooded stadium, because he's vowing to lead people into the light instead of punishing the darkness. So if I were to frame this in philosophical terms, I'd say that Batman learns to frame his understanding of himself and Gotham as not an autonomous individual in a city, but as an idea proposed by French philosopher Gilles Deleuze known as the dividual. Not the individual, but the dividual. It's the idea that we are all a part of and affect one another, and society isn't a collection of atomized individuals so much as it is a single complex organism in which we are all constantly influencing, molding, and constructing each other. I think this idea is embodied quite well in the lingering mystery of who killed Bruce Wayne's parents. Was it Maroni? Was it Falcone? Was it some random thug? You see, it doesn't really matter, because this organism, this complex society of evolving, interlinked individuals is the thing that's sick, and that's what killed Thomas and Martha Wayne. So even if Batman did catch the killer and punished him, it wouldn't do anything, because vengeance is impotent in healing society. Now, ultimately, the film doesn't offer a prescription for rehabilitating society other than Batman vowing to do better for the people and the new mayor vowing to regain the public's faith in the institutions, but I mean, that's okay. This is a Batman movie, not a political manifesto. And when you compare it to Nolan's work, I think it's a really interesting contrast. How do we heal society? Through symbols and scapegoats, or through rehabilitation on the state, institutional, and civil society levels? Curious to hear what you guys think. You can let me know on my Twitch stream. My name is CalSaryCanet87. I'm going to be streaming Elden Ring for probably the next couple of months. You can come on. We could talk about Batman. You can ask me anything. I'm having a really good time doing it. If I may flatter myself, I'm quite good at playing and interacting with people at the same time. So come celebrate this movie being awesome with me by hitting me up on Twitch. Link in the description. Elden Ring is also so awesome. Subscribe to this channel for further Batman videos if you guys like this one and my continued analysis of Season 25 of South Park. That's it from me, guys, and as always, peace.